All right, another week, another Division II conference we're breaking down tonight. It's the Northern Sun Intercollegiate Athletic Conference, the NSIC, for most of you normal people out there. Again, all of our transfer portal data, courtesy of Athlink. That's the platform we use for a lot of that stuff. And it's kind of an interesting piece here. Jamestown playing their first full year of an NSIC and Division II schedule, coming up from the NAIA level. Drew joining me once again tonight. I think the best place to start with this conference, the team that made it the furthest out of the NSIC a year ago, that being Minnesota State. Mankato, the Mavericks. They made it to the national semifinals. Yes, they lose to Valdosta State. They had a hell of a run in doing so. It feels like, to me, a resurgence of those Maverick teams of the 2010s that would go and rattle off these 13 or 14 win seasons, as if it were just part of a day-to-day type basis. They made it to the championship in 2014 and 2019, and this feels like a team that's encroaching on that same level of success. Now, in the portal, Athlink shows 11 players in, including the former all-conference defensive back Kai West, 2 other DBs that saw snaps last year. Certainly an area they need to address. They're bringing in 9 transfers. That's highlighted by the All-American, the former NSIC Defensive Player of the Year, Marcus Hansen. We talked about him earlier. We talked about Harding. He was with Bemidji State. He's back in the Northern Sun this time playing for the Mavs. The Beavers, though, Drew, not on the 2025 schedule for this Maverick squad. So we don't get the homecoming / revenge. I don't know if it's much of a revenge game. I don't know if there's really bad blood there. We don't get that matchup, which is kind of disappointing. I feel like that would be a really cool storyline for this conference. But otherwise, in terms of the portal, Nasir Jones, he comes from Slippery Rock. He didn't get many snaps in 24. Not the full story, though, with Jones. He previously played at Bloomsburg. He was an all-PSAC East selection, almost 1,000 yards and 6 touchdowns in his career. But going into 2025 with this Mavs team, big-time non-conference matchup against a perennial power in Northwest Missouri State. That one in week 0. That the Mavs actually went down to Northwest last year and came back with a victory. This time, though, it'll be in Blakesley Stadium. And that's going to be a big-time game to kind of set the tone for this Maverick squad heading into 2025. And you go down and talk about this full schedule and also some of the questions for this team in 2025. Of course, you start off under center. No more Hayden Eckern. The only other quarterback to see snaps last year, redshirt freshman Mitchell Thompson. Going into sophomore season, he's 6'3", 220, 15 carries and 14 pass attempts. That's not enough volume necessarily to just shoe him in that number 1 quarterback spot for this squad. Certainly has the frame. You imagine he has the ability, but he still has to go out there and obviously earn this thing. Expecting him to do just that. But also in that room, you got Iowa Central JUCO quarterback Justin Silverstein, who I couldn't find a ton of information on, to be honest. He may be in the picture, formerly at D1 Long Island, could definitely be a big part of that. Junior Antoine Johnson listed on the roster, also could not find much information on him. Quarterback room, a lot of question marks. You know Thompson, will be a big part of that. And finally, this team, they had one of the worst passing defenses in the conference last year. Even if it was only around 200 yards per game, it doesn't feel like a ridiculous number. Combine that with losing some top DBs to the portal, you see a point of emphasis for this 2025 Mavs squad. I'm sure that the coaching staff over there are starting to address it, man.
Yeah, I think obviously when you lose as many guys as you did from a really good team that went to the Final Four, the first thing you're thinking is, how do we replace those guys? Obviously, you talked about they're bringing in guys from the portal, which is obviously going to help. But internally, where do we get guys from, right? Like we've talked about with multiple teams in the Division II level, it's not necessarily, let's go reload from the portal like some of these Division I schools do, but it's, how do we build from within? So if you're looking at, the quarterback room, or you're looking at what we're talking about, the linebackers and defensive backs, because the back 7 was struggling this past year. So like, who's from those rooms are going to step up? Who's going to all of a sudden be the next guy to where, like, Minnesota State, like you said, they had a very good, very successful season last year. And there's nothing that's holding them back from having another year, except for the fact that you're going to need guys to step up.
You want to develop, absolutely. And tell me a little bit about the Vikings, some of the best competition for them inside of this conference.
Yeah, so the Vikings, obviously very familiar with the Minnesota State Mavericks, because this was the team that the Minnesota State Mavericks beat in the first round of the playoffs after they got their rematch on the Augustana Vikings, because the Vikings beat Minnesota State early in the season, but then ended the season with a loss to Bemidji and then lost to Minnesota State in the playoff rematch. they're looking to build, off their 2025 with a reload. But I will say Augustana does lose a good amount of guys. Let's talk about their first guy that isn't coming back. You're looking anytime you replace a running back that goes for 1,000 yards, it's one of those big hits. And Jared Epperson was that guy. Graduated as well as, and then you look at the defensive side of the ball. You got Hayden Wallace, linebacker from Kansas City. You lost him as well as Cade Lynott, another linebacker, and then as well as defensive back um, Peyton Buckley. Right, like he had close to 100 or 90 tackles last season as a defensive back. So you're losing a lot of guys defensively right there, as well as a 1,000-yard rusher. So it's not necessarily the greatest thing to hear. But let's talk about the guys that are going to help them out, right? You're bringing in 3 transfers. Cornelius May from Minnesota State. That should be interesting. As well as Josh Larson from South Dakota and James McCuh, I think is how you say it, from Illinois State. So can the defense maintain that standard with heavy losses at linebacker and also a little bit in the defensive game? And then are we going to be working with a one-guy backfield, or is it going to be a backfield by committee? That's the type of thing to see.
I like that. I like that verbiage. Yeah.
Yeah, and then as far as key returners, Isaiah Huber could be a very good guy to step up in that lead role as receiver. Gunnar Hensley is back as the returning starting quarterback. Logan Leonard is someone in the secondary that I expect to anchor based off his last season, and then Grady Sherman is a big piece up front. So you got guys that obviously are able to make bigger plays and more time, as like leaders. So let's see how the Vikings do with that.
Yeah, that offensive backfield, you kind of find the hot hand, so to speak, right? A lot of guys, you imagine those first couple weeks of the season, trial by fire, get them in there, see how they go. And the running back, it's such a fickle position at times because guys might need a series or two to really get going. It'll be interesting to see how that shakes out, that room over there. But let's talk about the Beavers. One of the 2 teams that are the Beavers today. The first one being Bemidji State. 10-4 a year ago, this team that has gotten into the playoffs, and I'll be honest with you, overachieved the last couple of years. They've done a fantastic job of doing just that. They did a national quarterfinal a year ago, had some battles with Minnesota State. Unfortunate, we aren't getting another one of those, like I said earlier on. 4 losses in 2024, Drew, by a combined 10 points. I mean, talk about a team that really, truly believes they were a few snaps or bounces away from pulling off what could have been an undefeated season heading into the playoffs. And then from there, it shakes out the way that it shakes out. One of the things that I definitely want to highlight about these guys is their stadium setup and location has got to be one of the best in Division II. And I know that on their homecoming game, they do often jump right into the water after the homecoming win, which in Minnesota is not exactly balmy weather. It's usually ridiculously cold and frigid, but this picture right here is pretty nice. But talking about Bemidji a little bit more in terms of
Kobe, have played their personal experience. We opened up there last year on Thursday night. Place was rocking, and very cool scene, especially when the sun started to set. It was very cool. We'll say that.
And that was an overtime contest too, yeah.
Yep.
That would have been nuts. I love that for them, but what we don't love is the transfer portal losses. 5 DBs in the portal this cycle. I mean, it's starting to become a trend here inside of this conference. That's a ridiculous number. We talked about Hansen earlier on. In terms of addition, though, 2 Minnesota natives coming back from FCS, North Dakota State, both of them. Defensive back Reese Sheldon, wide receiver Cedric Wall will both be making the return to Minnesota and joining the ranks of Bemidji State. They got 3 new pieces on their defensive line, starters coming in from Delta State, Southwest Minnesota, and, of course, long snapper. Got to talk about the specialist, bringing him in to make sure those balls are on point, my friend. But finally, talk about this 2025 schedule. QB1, wide receiver 1, graduated, move on. What's next for this Beaver squad, this Beaver offense? Who steps up going into 2025? Wide receiver 2 from last year, Drayton Lehman. He's poised for breakout senior season. He had 600 yards, 4 touchdowns a year ago. 5'8", 186. This is the kind of guy Bemidji State has made their money on, so to speak, over the last couple of years in ways that I've been following. They have not been the team to have a glorified Megatron on the outside that they just lofted up to down the sideline. They are going to work you across the middle of the field, across with different kind of route concepts, and they've got these quick guys like this that are able to dink and dunk you down the field, so to speak. Don't mistake that. They might lull you to sleep with some of those and then hit you over the top or hit you open in the middle of the field, depending on what kind of coverage you're running. But those are the kind of guys Bemidji has made their money with. Peters most recently being that guy. Would not expect Lehman to be the next up in line there. Questions for me, though. This is a team, I kind of talked about it earlier. They've overachieved. The team's calling card has been their ability to win on the road. They've done it in the playoffs both the last 2 seasons in states like Texas and Colorado. The Beavs know how to travel. Defense travels. That's something that this team has hung their hat on. How do you keep that going? A lot of that starts with the defensive line. Of course, talked about Hansen, but you also graduate 4 other guys on that defensive front. You're going to need some young guys to step up and get into those roles. Thankfully, it sounds like they've prepared themselves for that exact situation. Eli Cohen is a guy that should be able to lead the charge there. Him and a few others got some playoff reps in some of those high-intensity situations and environments a year ago. Expect that to kind of charge them into this season and give them some very valuable experience at a high level. They should hit the ground running as opposed to maybe needing an acclimation period come week 1, Drew.
Yeah, and a team that gets hot at the end of the year and obviously loses at the end and doesn't, there's only one team that celebrates at the end of the year. So a team that got hot, now they have momentum on their side and they know exactly what was going right, what was doing the right plays, the right schemes. And as far as that, so expect them to, build off that even with different people. So as far as Sioux Falls, though, is concerned, a signature upset over Minnesota State helped them climb back into the NSIC mix. They did lose to Bemidji State and Augustana, which we know as GLIAC people that 8-3 sometimes just isn't quite good enough to make it to the postseason, and that was the case here. Great season,
Yep.
but you know how it is when it comes to the Division II playoffs. As far as departures are concerned, Matt Goring in the portal, linebacker, lose him, but you do add a couple guys from the portal as well. I'll touch on this. Owen McLeod, a linebacker from North Dakota, a wide receiver, Isaiah Manuel from Minnesota State, and safety Gavin Nunley from St. Thomas, the Division One or the FCS team.
There you
And
go.
so, as far as 2025 is concerned, I'm looking at like the next tier of NSIC opponents, right? The Bemidji's, the teams we really just talked about, right? Can you beat maybe 2 of them, or maybe all 3? But you got to beat more than one of them, I think, to necessarily get into the playoffs and do some dancing. And then as far as the defensive transfers, are they going to help solidify that back 7 and help them right there? As far as key returners, Andy Hansen a year ago was, I believe, a redshirt freshman and led the team in tackles. That's a huge accomplishment for him, and expect him to get better. Garrett Hoffman, also a younger guy in the secondary, had a very successful year, so expect that. But the guy I want to touch on the most, Camden Dean, do-it-all playmaker. He led the team in both rushing and passing. He accounted for over 30 touchdowns a season ago. When you bring back a quarterback that not only is a dual threat, but is the guy on your offense, we've talked about this with multiple teams across Division II. When you have that guy, you want to build around that guy instead of having the pieces and trying to find the last puzzle piece. This is one where it's like, okay, now the chips are going to fall where they may, but we got a guy that knows exactly our offense, knows what to do, and is a dual threat guy as well.
Yeah, and Coach Glow and company, they got a ton of familiarity inside of this conference, knows it in and out, and we'll have these guys ready to go, right? And it's all about those tiers. How do you separate yourself? How do you crack into that upper tier if you're a team like Sioux Falls? Another team kind of really on that stepping stone, so to speak, the Bulldogs, Minnesota Duluth, a team that has been a perennial contender inside of this conference and out. They lose around a dozen players to the portal, but only 2 of them saw real snaps, quote unquote, last year, according to Athlink. So maybe not the biggest time difference makers they're losing inside of the portal. Handful of incoming transfers. One interesting defensive addition, though, Drew. Gus Taylor coming over from Wayne State in Michigan, not Wayne State College, that we'll talk about later on today. They did have a quote-unquote spring game up here at Northern Michigan, and seeing just a little bit of it, I didn't walk away incredibly impressed with this Duluth squad, the way they were able to operate, but I will obviously put an incredibly large asterisk next to that and say that the ones were not out there for probably the majority of this contest, and that you can't really judge that from a from a very neutral standpoint, right? You want to see the best on best, and you didn't really get to see a whole ton of that. But talking about their captains, I think is a great way to talk about this 2025 squad. And of course, this set of captains headlined by the man that I think is a surprise to no one, Kyle Walljasper, the quarterback for this team, really is what this team is built around in both scheme and identity. Tough, downhill runner, sometimes downright disregard for his own well-being at times. I think that's what this Bulldog team is all about. You watch this guy play. Yeah, he's a quarterback, 6'1", 240-pound quarterback. He runs like no quarterback you've ever seen before, and he's a hell of a lot more athletic than I think a lot of people give him credit for. The previous Harlan Hill nominee was a first-team all-conference selection in 2024, and he's got more than just his size. Averaged 200 passing yards per game last year. That was the best of his career. Had 22 touchdowns to boot through the air. His favorite target right there, Deshaun Ames, is back, the 6'1" wide receiver, 11 catches and receiving touchdowns, in 2024, and really has made the jump every single year. This final year for him could be the year he eclipses 1,000 yards and kind of solidifies himself as one of the best wide receivers inside of the conference. Then you go defensive side of the ball. Alex Sylvester, Matt Wiertz. Sylvester, stable, that defensive secondary, 6 PBUs a year ago. Wiertz transferred in from NDSU, became a second-team All-NSIC selection, 4.5 sacks. And when it comes to the staff for this Bulldog squad, a couple internal promotions, one outside hire at the offensive line position for this Minnesota Duluth squad, but the staff stays mostly intact. This team had the highest points per game out of every squad in the conference. They couldn't close out the close games. They had 4 losses a year ago. All of them were by 4 points or less. That is the difference. 4 points or less in all of those games. And again, just a few snaps or bounces away from being a really, really strong position to making a playoff run.
Yeah, when you look at teams in the NFL, right, the Kansas City Chiefs, they won so many close games, and that propelled them to a 15-2 record. And then you look at other teams where it's like Cincinnati Bengals, they lose all those close games. Similar to what we have here, right? You're a couple points away from being a top end of that the NSIC and being potentially up for a playoff bid. So I think it's like how you close games, how you finish it. And, when you come back as a Duluth Bulldog, it's that fourth quarter, that last rep in the weight room, it's all about finish, right? So that's exactly what I think is their mentality going into this next season is, hey, we were close, but obviously there's one more rep. There's one more play in practice you can make. There's one more play in the game. So having that mindset to necessarily propel them into next season.
100%, dude.
So next I'll start off with Northern State. Being a Lions fan, I understand when the team starts off slow and you're like, man, are we going to even be good this year? Well, how about starting off 0-4 and then going 6-5 to finish the season, same way the Lions did a couple years ago. So credit to them as far as that's a remarkable finish, finishing 6-1 to end the year. So you talk about building momentum. We talked about that with necessarily like Bemidji's playoff run. This is how you build momentum too. So you had upset wins over Bemidji, Duluth, right? There's success right there. And then also, like, if you look at the guys that are transferring to the Wolves this year, all conference, Trey Birdsong from D3 Illinois College, DB Lorenzo Jones from Minnesota State, and then D1 Missouri State, Brock Bagozzi. Yeah, there we go. And then Carter Campbell from SMU, right? So, like, you're having guys that are necessarily like they're all sensing what we from outsiders look and go, wow, that was a really good season. But I'm sure within that building, it's like they can feel it that like they're going in the right direction, right?
Yep.
So, however, it does look that they did lose a quarterback to the portal. Daniel Britt out of Las Vegas, former Northern Arizona transfer, is back under center.
Britt is back. Yep, he's back. So that's good for them.
Yeah, he's back. But so you're going to have some competition, right? And as far as just overall, where do we start off with is something for that. Just taking care of the ball, right? Not pretty much a 1-to-1 touchdown to interception ratio a season ago. So taking care of the ball and, being more effective there would be something to where to start. And then we'll be joined in the backfield by leading rusher Hank Kraft. So there's also another returner there. And then you look, 2 first-team all-conference guys in 2024 are back this fall. Jake Adams, he had 147. Wow, reading that right. Read it out loud. 147 tackles last season, second in the country.
Unreal.
Wow. Yeah.
Unreal.
And then Kobe, I believe that we have here that he cut his mullet between year 1 and year 2.
Yeah, so I'm looking at the roster pictures doing my research, right?
Okay.
And year 1, he's going mean. I should have pulled it up. Mean mug with the mullet. Year 2, mullet gone, big smile. And you see the difference in the stats. I got to see what the headshot looks like for year 3.
Well, I will say we had a theory at Northwood that when guys mean mug, it means they're in a relationship. When they smile, it means they're single. So maybe that was the case. No idea. That was a theory that we had back in the day. So,
but yeah, Jake Adams, man, he is.
Jake
you
Adams,
look at the stats.
big things. Maybe a new haircut. Maybe a face tattoo. Something. I don't know.
Oh,
Just
whoa.
hey, you never know what's going to happen. But Jake Adams, what you do know with Jake Adams is you're getting a dog on the field.
Yeah, that could be one of the most highly anticipated headshots of the 2025 season, seeing what Adams comes out with. The first team All-American a year ago, absolute dog out of Wisconsin. And that's the team over there, too. While as the team builds, the community support builds for a squad like this, too, over in Aberdeen, South Dakota, in the Bank Stadium. And from what I hear, the Gypsy Days over there, their homecoming is absolutely popping over there. They have had some great turnout. And like I said, the community support continues to build. That in turn will help with some of the success on the field for this Northern State squad. Has been a really cool story to follow up with. And again, you talk about it, 6-5 is not something that jumps out on paper, but when you do a little bit more digging and see what this team has had to overcome to get there, that's what makes it a little bit more important. Now, in very much that same boat, Minot State at 5-6 last year. Why not Minot? This is a team that has had one of the best seasons in their NCAA history. And you start that off coming off the best season inside of that history. Started 3-0 for the first time since 2002. Their first homecoming win since 2010. That hurts a little bit, saying that out loud. That's a long time to not win a homecoming game. But they're back. The Beavers are absolutely back. And the biggest news piece, I think, around this team and this defense in particular, Wilfredo Diaz, the D2 All-American at Edinboro last year. He's 6 foot, 215 pounds. We just talked about the guy that was second in the nation for tackles. This guy was the one in front of him. Almost 13 tackles per game. He led the nation across all divisions. He's a Florida native with one more year of eligibility. He is going to be a mainstay on this defense, a staple throughout the course of 2025. He actually brings another Edinboro linebacker with him, a few more D1 bounce backs. Not one, but two specialists with starting experience coming in to Minot here. And the portal works both ways. Unfortunate, as we all know, at one point as many as 23 players leaving for the portal, almost a dozen of them seeing snaps at one point or another for this Minot squad. But you know who's back? Evan Lovett, redshirt senior, poised to run all over the NSIC this year. Almost 1,000 yards in the ground last year inside of this, what really is an unapologetically downhill style of offense from the Beavers. And this guy, 6'1", 235 pounds, he forces defenders, Drew, to make what you and I both know to be a business decision every once in a while.
Ankle tackler right there.
Yeah. All of a sudden, when your Mike backer turns into, a little ankle biter, that's not good. That's not good. This is the guy that makes that happen. Another really neat story here for you. Cody Ratesman, back for the Beavers after standout sophomore campaign, 52 tackles, interception, fumble recovery. He's one of the Splash Brothers duo on this defense over at Minot. The other part, his brother Connor, who's also back at linebacker in 2025. Splash Bros, maybe not the first ones to don that name. I like it. I like the fact that they're doing it.
I don't know if there was ever a group of two called the Splash Brothers before. I guess we'll have to do some research on them, maybe watch some YouTube videos. But that's pretty cool, right? Anytime you get a chance to play with your brother, obviously both of us have, whether it be high school or college. It's a really cool experience for mom and dad. You know what I mean? Yep. So, but let's touch base on the University of Mary. I'm going to butcher this, Kobe. Marauders?
The Marauders. Come on, brother.
Marauders.
The Marauders.
All right. Ryan Blair is coming in from the portal, okay? D3 Whitworth, that's where he's so it's going to be a change of offense. You see him crush it at the D3 level. You compare him with the new offensive coordinator, Taylor Colts, coming in from Kentucky, and then as well as a couple other guys, 4 incoming D1 bounce backs, headlined by former Utah Tech wide receiver Damani Wilkes at the FCS level, and then linebacker back for the Marauders.
Hell yeah.
Second team all NSIC, 5.5 tackles and 10 tackles for or 5.5 sacks, 10 tackles for loss, 2 forced fumbles, disruptive guy defensively, Kobe. Expect Mason Phillips to be that guy that necessarily is. We always talk about like leaders and guys who are like tough. When you walk off the bus, you're like, that's that guy. Expect Mason Phillips to be that for the University of Mary Marauders this season.
He needs to be, because that I'll level with you, Drew. That Marauder defense did not have a lot go their way a year ago. He needs to be that guy, to be the spark plug, to be the catalyst for that defensive front. I know about Ryan Blair. I know what he's able to do, and it'll be interesting to see that pairing with the new offensive coordinator, to see what they can put together with the weapons that currently exist inside of that University of Mary offense. But a team that has really struggled as of late, Southwest Minnesota State, the Mustangs, 0-11 a year ago. They played some competitive ball in 2023. They really regressed, it felt like, and took a step back in 2024, which is tough to see from any standpoint. The light, though, at the proverbial end of the tunnel for this squad, that's the first team all-conference defensive back, Parker Knutson, returning for 2025. He earned those honors as only a redshirt freshman inside of the NSIC. Let's just say the ceiling is the roof for a guy like Parker and the Southwest Minnesota squad. Thought I could at least get a smile out of you there. I failed.
Splash Brothers, ceiling is the roof. Like, what are we doing right now? Have these ever been used before?
Splash Brothers was real. They put that word on. I didn't come up with that. All right, I did not come up with the Splash Bros. That was from their website. The ceiling is the roof. That one is on me. I tried something. It didn't work. I'll workshop it. We'll come back to it. All that aside, Parker, absolute dog, 6'1", 187-pound. He is one of these guys that has to step up and be kind of the focal point of this defense for them. He had a team high 5 interceptions, 13 PBUs last year. He led the NSIC in passes defended. He's going to draw the best target, the best receiver every week, and he's going to have to, right? With a lot of these potent offenses. You also got to be on the lookout. Senior linebacker Josiah Henderson, who was a second-team selection a year ago. He led the team with 83 tackles, 10 TFLs. And this is a great one. In his 3 seasons, he has played in all 33 games. That's a warrior. That is an absolute warrior. To not miss a game over that stretch is probably as impressive as the stats come, dude.
Yeah, he's probably got an NIL deal with like Icy Hot or something like that. So he's definitely a warrior out there. And and our next team is Wayne State. It's not the Warriors, it's the Wildcats. Wayne State College Wildcats. Solid 2024 season, which included a win over Concordia St. Paul in the quote-unquote Kobe Egg Bowl, which not the Egg Bowl from Mississippi and Mississippi State. It's the Egg Bowl, got that from the schedule. But the Wildcats did fall short of the postseason after having top-tier losses against the teams we talked about in the beginning of the show, Minnesota State, Bemidji, and Sioux Falls. So 2025 is going to be a reset year. A lot of guys departing, especially on offense. Let's just cover them just a little bit before we get into additions. Latravius Boyd, portal, all-conference guy. Kendrick Watkins-Hogue, portal, all-conference guy. That was a wide receiver and a running back. And then you look defensively, you got Joe Morrison, portal, all-conference guy, and losing starting quarterback Nick Cohn. So transfer portal additions, you are bringing in Malakisic Sick. So sick. That's pretty cool. Ty Johnson, another receiver. And then, so my questions then, based on what we had kind of talked about, was who emerges on offense? Losing the guys at the big 3, quarterback, running back, receiver. Obviously, offensive line's harder to kind of track as far as that stuff, but you're losing the top skill position guys. So who's going to necessarily produce right away? And then going into that, Bennett Dannenbring, could he be the guy to take command at quarterback? He only had 6 pass attempts last season. However, Kobe, if I'm not mistaken, he was 2 for 6 with 2 touchdowns. So talk about, 2 completions, 2 touchdowns.
That's solid.
That's solid, right?
And that's Malachi Sick, by the way. I think that was a little typo in our rundown. Malachi Sick there.
Malachi Sick?
Yeah, that was no. It's Malachi, just Malachi. Yeah, a little bit
So that would have been
less.
cool. That would have been
Yeah.
cool. Anyway, key returners as well. Clyde Hinton, DB number 8, guy in the secondary for them. Carter Zitzman, D lineman number 97, and then we talked about Bennett. Can he be that guy to necessarily take the next step and become the man under center?
Yep. And then talking about this Morehead Dragon squad, one of the best, most potent passing attacks in D2 football. They're not going anywhere because the quarterback is back. Jack Strand back under center. 3,400 yards, 32 passing touchdowns a year ago. He was the D2football.com on that Elite 100 group. He set the program records for completions, attempts, pass yards, pass touchdowns, and total offense. Strand did for this MSUM squad. His top targets, the wide receivers, Gage Florence, Madden Thorson, also back on the outside. They had 800 plus yards apiece a year ago, combined for a bunch of touchdowns. Junior defensive back Gavin Jarchow also returns, after a season with 77 tackles, 6 PBUs. A lot to be excited about with this MSUM squad. The thing is, for me though, is we've seen what the top end of this team can look like. Especially, you go back to that Duluth win a year ago. They can be dangerous. The thing is, consistency has not been their friend as of late. We need to see that out of them week in and week out, and that comes when you run this kind of air raid style offense. I would not expect you to see a drastic change in the way that they play. They're going to be high risk takers. That's the way Strand plays. That's the way this kind of offense plays. But when they start to connect, man, there's not many teams in the conference that are more dangerous than Morehead.
Absolutely. And, as the weather gets colder, does the offense change a little bit? It's managing
Stall out, so to speak.
Not necessarily stall out, but hey, it gets cold, right?
Yep.
So it's like, does that change? We'd see teams where it's like the Dolphins, right? Every time it gets cold, Tua can't throw. So it's necessarily like, are we going to figure that out as far as with Strand is concerned? Not saying that he had any of that, but like, is that going to ever change anything? So, but when you had a guy like Jack Strand coming back for the Dragons, big things, a lot of yards, a lot of touchdowns. So that's great. Next, we do have a Warriors team. It's not Wayne State. It's Winona State. Opening the 2025 with a neutral site game at TCO Stadium, the training facility for the Minnesota Vikings. Wow, that is awesome.
Is that ridiculous or what? I was just doing a little bit of research on that.
Because the Vikings are a horribly ran franchise and J.J. McCarthy's not a good quarterback. But former special teams coordinator Brian Curtin was named the interim head coach back in January. Then he got the tag removed a week later, so he got promoted in a week. That's probably an all-time record.
Really?
I've been on the staff since 1997, multiple capacities. All 5 of their all-conference honorees from a year ago are gone, which obviously that sucks. Let's just say it right there, right? When all 5 of your guys and your dudes are gone, it's like, ooh, okay, how do we reload that? I'll tell you how they reloaded. Kobe transfers coming in, 4 DBs headlined by all conference. Julian Urosti, he's from the NAIA Kansas Wesleyan. 2 D linemen from D2 UND, which we are very familiar with, and D1 Eastern Illinois, respectively. Linebacker Jackson Heel comes in from D1 New Mexico State. So there's guys right there to instantly impact. And then can Jackson Flottmeyer step up as the guy in his redshirt season? A lot of questions regarding the offense, right? Do they have the quality, to necessarily like prove themselves early on, right? And then lastly, the thing I'll touch on is Jack Brent be front and center defensively of this squad, or Jake Brent, sorry. But I think that when you look at Winona State, it's necessarily like, okay, we lost a couple guys. We got a bunch of guys coming in. It's can we start, our campaign with a good couple wins. And then obviously, as we talked about with other teams in the conference, there are going to be Minnesota State. There are going to be Bemidji State. You got to stay consistent to be on that level.
100%. And then quickly going through CSP, a.k.a. Concordia St. Paul, the Golden Bears, 2-9 a year ago. Squared it off against Bemidji State this spring. I didn't see too much of a takeaway from that spring scrimmage, so I don't really know what to make of that exactly. They bring in 3 transfers from the D-line, 2 of them from the NAIA ranks at some solid institutions. Kaiser, Benedictine, really familiar with those squads. 2025 head coach Shannon Currier, it's his 14th season at Concordia, albeit during 2 different stints at the helm, the first of which reigning and hailing a lot more success maybe than the latter of the 2. Senior offensive lineman, though, Caden Christensen, he's going to anchor that front 5 this season. He has to be a voice up front for this squad. He's a 3-time captain, and he's a guy that they're going to have to rely on as an all NSIC selection to be that voice like I talk about. Jackson Compton back under center for the Golden Bears. He will be without their star running back, Jalen Richardson. He was the focal point of the offense a year ago. How do you get creative or rely on some of these younger guys to step into that role? Is it someone that kind of achieves and steps right into that, or are you trying out multiple guys at the beginning of the season trying to find the hot hand? So again, question marks for CSP, a team that has really struggled on more of the bottom tier of the NSIC. Can they make that jump and move forward maybe into that middle tier this year? Time will tell, my friend. Close us out with the newest addition to the conference.
Yeah, so let's talk about probably Jim Manzo's favorite team, the Jamestown Jimmies. They'll be their first year playing a full D2 schedule. New OC, special teams coordinator, someone who has dealt with multiple coordinators coming in. That's going to obviously be an adjustment, but that's what spring ball's for, right?
Sure.
That's what camp's for, adjusting to that, right? And so for the first time, you got 3 all first team, all conference guys from a season ago, but from what we can tell, they've graduated or moved on. So, like we talked about with multiple teams in this conference, when you do lose guys that were all conference guys, it's not necessarily can we get all guys to develop, but can we get in some guys? It does look like they brought in a few JUCO guys and some D1 bounce backs, but one guy that we do want to touch on is not named Jimmy, it's Johnny. Johnny Grant should be back under center. Threw for over 1,500 yards last season, 10 interceptions, 7 touchdowns. So obviously, we all know, sports. How can we get that switched and then one increase, one decrease? That's going to be a thing for Johnny to, see if he can do that, right? And with a new OC, you got plenty of time to learn the offense, get under center, understand new checks, understand what you can do at the line. So Johnny's going to have his, work cut out for him. But as the quarterback, that's what you want, right?
Yep.
So Johnny, Jimmy, James, doesn't matter. The Jimmies are playing a full T2 schedule this season, which is obviously
they are. And it might be a rude awakening for them, but coming from the North Star, which is no longer now the conference, 3-7 last year in the North Star. This is not a team that you expect to come in and shake up the conference right away. Let's see if they can hold true. If they can play some competitive ball, and again, you don't expect them to win outright in a lot of these, but we'll see if they can go and impress and overperform and overachieve.